50 years ago, when I was 16, I decided somehow that one day I'd really like to fish the national championships on merit within about 10 years. So I set myself a target. That came true 5 years later, and I fished Division 3 on the Trent in 1977. But the national I really wanted to fish was Division 1, and the team I was fishing for were Barclays Bank AA. They were down in Division 3. Eventually they got relegated, and then finally in the late 80s they got promoted 3 years on the bounce, until in 1990 they were finally in Division 1. And the venue in 1990 was the River Witham. I'd fished the Witham twice before in nationals, caught £1.25 in each one. Hard fishing, come about a third of the way down the section both times, and I wasn't that impressed by the river. There were fish there, but it was tough. It was outside my experience. But by 1990 I was far more experienced, had better tackle, and we enlisted the help of a guy called Roger Downing from Rotherham, who was an expert at catching eels on the pole, and that was our chosen tactic, to catch eels that year for a match in early September. For us it was probably the right tactic. We weren't good enough on bloodworm, which was the winning tactic as it turned out. Before the match, Wayne and myself went up and practiced, as did other members of the team. We found that we caught lots of fish. Although we were fishing for eels and we did okay, we caught roach and silver bream, small skimmers, rough, stuff like that. Even one day I had a load of dace, and we were quite surprised how good it was. But in our minds, although all those years ago I'd caught a pound, our sort of target weight seemed to be about a kilo, just over £2 would be good in most sections, and maybe a bit more in the better sections, and maybe £1 to £1.50 in the very hard sections. However, 1 week before the national, there was a qualifier for a final. I think it was in somewhere like Sweden or Denmark, called the Daiwa Masters, and it was 600 pegs. The national we were due to fish was over 1,000 pegs. It was 89 teams of 12, very, very big match. Back then the divisions were meant to be 90 teams, so we were one short for whatever reason. And so we got tickets for this Daiwa Masters, say 1 week before the national. And what had happened on the Witham that year was that instead of being, it was a hot summer, instead of being low and clear with no flow, it had a gentle flow with some colour. And the reason for that was that water was being pumped from the Trent into the Fosdyke, which is a Roman made canal that goes to Lincoln, and then put into the Witham, and then the water could be extracted by pumps to water the potato fields. So the Witham had some flow, a little bit of flow, and some colour. It wasn't low. It was kept artificially high as well, so they didn't just let the water go out to sea, and they could pump. And of course the fish went daft. The bream were feeding, the eels were okay, they were feeding reasonably well. Lots of roach and these silver bream and little skimmers were feeding as well, and rough, perch, stuff like that. So all in all, the prospects weren't bad at all, and we turned up for this Daiwa Masters, and I drew in what's always been known as the pound length, because traditionally there were no bream in it for that first sort of 50 pegs, and the most you could expect was a pound. That's why it's got its name. And I was only about peg 4 or 5, and I fished for eels on the pole with maggots, and I caught a few roach late on a waggler on the drop. Gordon Blanks of Essex County was next to me, and he got into a right mess, and but he had about 10 or 11 pounds. and he thought he was going to win the section. And the sections in the Daiwa Masters were 25 pegs. In some of the bigger Witham matches in the past, there were 50 or even 100 pegs. But that day there were 25, a far cry from today's matches with just 5 peg sections, and people call in matches of 10 pegs opens and stuff like that. Total nonsense. They're just knock-ups, really. Anyway, in that 600 peg match, in 450 of the pegs, in other words, 3/4 of the sections, the section winning weight was at least £10. And Gordon Blanks, even though he'd had 10 or 11 pounds, was about 5th in the section. I was sort of way down. I'm suddenly thinking, I've caught 2 kilos. We don't know how typical that was, but suddenly the target weight of a kilo, a couple of pounds, wasn't realistic. We needed to catch a lot more fish than that and up it to 2 kilos or even more if there were fish about, certainly to be positive and go for it. The winning weights were good as well. Over £60 won the match. I think over £30 was 10th. It really was a fish festival. Very, very good fishing. Probably one of the best opens fished on the Witham for years. And even if you go back to the distant past, I doubt if there'd been a frame quite as good as that on any match, really. On the morning of the National, we were all ready to fish for eels and on the pole. And I think we might well have been staying in Sleaford. So we went up to the Witham and got to somewhere near Tattersall Bridge, and then followed the Witham up the sort of 4 miles of the roadside there, over Kirkstead Bridge to Woodall Spa, where the headquarters was, which is quite normal for the Nationals. And it being September and it was quite early, it was only about 7 o'clock in the morning, it's just getting light, there's no wind, it's going to be a hot day, lovely September day. And the river was absolutely alive with fish. There were bream rolling, roach topping, all over the river, even probably rudd, fish moving. And you think, we're going to fish this in nearly 4 hours because it doesn't start till 11 o'clock. It was just dripping with fish. And you're thinking, this could be a great match. Anyway, we drew our pegs. We got peg 77. I was on F section, which put me 120, 130 pegs below Kirkstead Bridge, of pegs going right up to Southery, and then right down below, I think it's Chapel Hill, and then a couple of sections down at Langrick. And I started, put some ground bait right across, and I started to fish the pole with maggots on about 9 metres. 22 hook, 1 gram pole float, dead simple stuff. And I caught plenty of eels that summer, practicing, I was quite confident on it. 2 pegs to my right, an angler was fishing bloodworm, and the people who fished bloodworm fished either a whip at about 3 metres or a long pole, and they bait both swims, fish both swims. And this angler went in, he put some ground bait in on his pole line, and he put in a little nugget of ground bait, 8 foot from the bank, 6 foot from the bank, went in on a 3 metre whip. The next thing, he's playing a 3.5 pound bream, caught 6 foot out from the bank, 7 foot out from the bank. And at this point, everyone's sort of thinking, this could be quite a match. He got it out. He's already almost got his basic team points. Meanwhile, I started to fish for eels, and after an hour I'd had 5 or 6. I'd probably got best part of a pound or something like that. And I had to go for the bream, and after about 25-30 minutes, I can't remember exactly, the tip went round and I found myself playing a decent bream, about 3 pounds. Bum pinching time, as they say, but I got it out okay. That was on worm and caster. But there were no more bream bites. I fished on for another half an hour or 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And I'd been feeding my pole line, and I went back to that and started to catch eels quite steadily. The angler next to me, who was fishing for Tewkesbury, was having a bit of a nightmare. He couldn't quite make his mind up what he was doing. He caught a little perch, possibly on the pole, but he wasn't really feeding the pole line. Didn't have bloodworm. He had to go on the tip. He dropped off a little eel, about 3 or 4 ounces. And I carried on catching eels. Now, whether I should have put a load more ground bait in is debatable. Maybe I should. I didn't. Quite a crowd started to build up sort of between me and 2 or 3 anglers further down. There was sort of 40 or 50 people maybe. They could watch me catching eels, watching other anglers catching odd bream, some on the pole, some on the tip. It was quite certainly plenty of action around on that section. At one point I hooked a fish, and with the eel fishing, the basic tactic was to have a rig set up so it's about 5 meters to hand, and then add the joints to make it up to 9 or 11 meters. We weren't really fishing beyond 11 or 12 meters back then. And when you hooked a fish, you just put the joints back until you got to that 5 meter, broke off, and fairly strongly pulled up, and the eels will come flying out of the water, and you'll unhook them over the net. Very few of them needed netting. They were quite small. I got what I thought was another eel bite, hit the fish, whacked the sections behind me, broke the pole, and just carried on pulling quite hard. Out popped a 8 to 10 ounce roach, came flying out of the water. Must have had quite tight elastic on there to hit the eel bites hard. It whacked me in the middle of the chest, fell off the hook and dropped into the keep net, at which point the crowd burst out laughing, and I got some applause. I thought, oh, they all count. The angler next to me was getting increasingly desperate though. With 3/4 of an hour to go, still got this ½ ounce perch, and everyone around him, by then I've got sort of probably over 8 pounds, maybe more. Other anglers have got more than that with bream, and he's got ½ an ounce, which is going to put him pretty much last in the section. He mixed up a new bowl of ground bait, chucked out the other stuff, which was by now sun-baked, threw that in the grass, mixed up a load, put about 10 balls in right across, and went across on it. 20 minutes later, tip went round. He's got a bream probably over 4 pounds, followed by another one of a couple of pounds, and then about 2 minutes before the whistle, another one maybe a couple of pounds, just about. And he's very, very relieved. I promise I won't tell anyone, but here's his result. Tewkesbury F78. And he had 4 kilos, so he's gone from what we're talking about, 15 grams or 10 grams up to 4 kilos in that last 40 minutes, ½ an hour, 40 minutes, and did okay. My bream plus a roach, 1 or 2 bits and bobs, little silver bream and a ruff, and 25 eels or so, went very nearly 10 pounds, 4 kilos 520. Not enough to win the section. The section of 89 was one with around about 8 kilos, around about 17 pounds, and I was 9th. So it shows, and this wasn't one of the good sections. This was wasn't the bad sections, which were being won with sort of 5 or 6 pounds, but wasn't the best section for bream by a long way. So very pleased with that result. That was the best for Barclays. Roger Downing, who was not fishing for us, fishing for another team, he fished for eels. He probably had the best eel weight on the day. He had about an ounce more than I did, about just over a fraction over 10 pounds. And of course my eel weight was boosted by a bream and other stuff. But it was good to know that the way of fishing for eels did work. But it was the bloodworm anglers, they cleaned up when it came to the team event. Trev's Browning, who had gone up through the divisions year after year after year, had won it, a very convincing win, and their weights were tremendous. They had some really good catches, even on bloodworm, pounds of fish, and it really was. I would say it was the best national ever, because I don't have all the records of what the total weights were, but it was well up there. An awful lot of fish caught. I hope you've enjoyed this one. It was the last national I ever fished, and it was a day I sort of thought, I've made the grade, I've been there, I've now got the t-shirt, and I didn't fish anymore afterwards. I could have fished more. And Barclays, sadly, although they did very well the following year, back in the top 30 in the national, the only way was down after that, and they got relegated on the Trent the following year, and then came plumb last on the Nene the year after that, and then they struggled on in Division 3 for about another 4 or 5 years, and before the sort of sponsorship dried up. But there you are. The nationals nowadays, it's more like about 45 teams in Division 1 and maybe 30 teams in Division 2. And it's teams of 10, I believe, not teams of 12. So it's much smaller matches. And the prestige seems to have disappeared, really. Hope you've enjoyed this week. And until next time, it's goodbye for now.